Many people think that the saying, God created the world out of nothing, is an explanation of where creation came from. However, that is not true at all. All that says is where creation didn't come from things. This still leaves an open question. Where did creation and all of its complexity actually come from? Welcome to the Seeker's Tavern. We will investigate this topic by asking these three questions. What is creation? Where did it come from? And where is it going? This tavern is a welcome place for all seekers of truth, so grab a pint and feel free to comment on any of the points I make. What is creation? To start with, let's see what we have so far. We have the Trinitarian God, simple and single, and we have creation, complex and numerous. But how can that be? Where would God get the idea of multiple imperfect things if he could only see and want his own single and perfect image? It's not like things existed prior to creation for God to observe them. The only thing God could observe prior to creation is himself, and nothing else, since, well, there wasn't anything else. This means that the ideas God had for all created things must have somehow originated from God's perfect image, but in such a way that the image is reduced and imperfect. This is because the only way for there to be many different things is for them to be imperfect. One is lacking something the other has, and vice versa, making them distinct. Given that God is a person with consciousness and will, is it possible? Do we humans have any such mental capabilities? We do. In fact, this is exactly what happens when we think of the north and south poles of a magnet. Can a north and south pole exist independently of each other? No. It's a single magnetic field that is impossible to divide. Can we mentally think of them as different? Yes, that's exactly what we're doing right now. This mental process is called abstraction. It allows us to focus on specific aspects of a concept while ignoring others. Abstraction is a fundamental cognitive process necessary for logic, mathematics, science, and language. If we, God's creation, can do it with our finite intellects, then God, our creator, can definitely do it even better than we can. As such, creation is not an increase from zero to something. It's a reduction from infinity to something. Therefore, God is not like a builder. He doesn't start from nothing and place the building blocks of creation out of nothing. God is rather like a sculptor, chipping away at his perfect image with the chisel of abstraction, which allows for multiple imperfect things to exist. So there we go. We are abstract fragments of the image of God. Yep. We are mere thoughts inside of God's mind. God is more real than we are. It's not God that is an imagination of the human mind. It's the human and the rest of creation that are an imagination of God's mind. Though there is one thing to point out. God's imagination is not the same as our imagination. It's perfect. As mentioned in the previous video, when God looks at something like himself, the image that he sees is real, which is the foundation of the Trinity, and why there are three persons in God rather than one. The first person is first, the second person comes from the perfect image of consciousness, and the third person comes from the perfect image of the will. The perfect image of God is God. Therefore, an abstraction of the perfect image of God is also real, just lesser, at least as real as you and I. So God's imagination is reality. Compared to that, if I make up a story inside of my mind, it's not real, and the characters don't have a will of their own. It's an important distinction to make, since we are not God, but rather just a part of his creation. So in short, creation is the image of God abstracted into different fragments. But this still leaves a question. Where did it come from? I could simply say that creation came from God, but that would be as insightful as saying that the human body is made up of atoms on a biology test. Rather, I think it would be much more interesting to ask what aspect of God is abstracted, what is reduced and what remains. If all the fragments of creation came from the abstraction of God's image, then we should be able to take a look at any one of them and compare it to God and see some sort of similarities as well as differences. There are two fundamental things in this universe we have to take into account: matter and mind, both created and therefore in the image of God. What are the similarities between God, mind and matter, and what are the differences? Our mind has consciousness and will, much like God does, except we are not omniscient nor omnipotent. But what about matter? There is action and reaction, much like the will and consciousness of mind. Just think about it. What exactly is free will? It's an ability to act freely, meaning that we can move however we want to. In comparison, matter can also move. This is a similar type of ability, except that matter cannot cause itself to move. It's not free. Likewise, consciousness is an ability to receive information. However, unlike a camera, which can only see itself with the help of a mirror, our consciousness can observe itself without external help. The reason why mind and matter are similar is because their abilities are similar. Both can cause and be caused. However, the difference is that the mind has self-referential properties. It can cause itself and observe itself, whereas matter cannot, which is what makes us active subjects and matter passive objects. All the fragments of creation, the fundamentals upon which everything is built, rest upon the image of God. The Trinity comes from the full image of God. The human mind comes from a partially abstracted image of God, and matter comes from the most abstracted image of God. In short, all fragments have action and reaction in common, but differ in the level of abstraction. That explains the fundamentals of nature. However, it doesn't end there. Where is it going? Just having simple fragments floating about wouldn't make for a very interesting universe. What is more interesting than what fragments there are is how they come together. All these fragments can be put together in various ways, creating complex shapes such as stars, planets, galaxies, and life. These fragments, all containing a part of God's image, can therefore be put together to reform His image to some degree. Just like the fragments have varying levels of action and reaction, so do the composites of those fragments. We have the most basic lifeforms, such as plants, that have a very basic ability to observe light and move towards it as they grow. Going further, we have various animals, some with a greater ability to observe and move than others. At the peak of creation, we have humans, composites of mind and matter. We have a much more sophisticated consciousness and will than animals, with advanced sciences originating from our consciousness and sophisticated humanities originating from our will. But the joining together of fragments is not just about their composition, like the composition of the human body, which is an aspect of space. It's also about time, movement, behavior, actions. The way we move and act can also be closer or further away from the image of God. That's why God's image does not only explain our origin, but also our destination, and so is the basis for our morality. Just look at how life acts. Life creates and replicates its own image just like God creates us in His image. Just like a fragment, such as physical matter, comes from the image of God, so does the composition and the act of life. Therefore, we can go beyond the human and look at how people come together to form a family unit, social groups, and finally, societies, which includes politics and religion. The more we unify all the different fragments, the more we come to be in the image of God. Because the fragments are not perfect, we can never fully recreate the image of God and become God. However, that also means we can spend an eternity on getting closer and never get bored of it. In short, creation is heading towards a unification of the fragments to restore God's image. In summary, creation is the image of God abstracted into different fragments. All fragments have action and reaction in common, but differ in the level of abstraction. And finally, creation is heading towards a unification of the fragments to restore God's image. Time for a challenge. What do you think is the next step in restoring God's image? I think we have formed pretty large societies, but we still lack any real unity. Do you think that there ought to be a one-world order, or are our differences our strength? If you do happen to be in an organization, like perhaps organized religion, or an organized secular group aimed at unifying the world, which one is it and why do you think is the right one? Let me know in the comments.